Gone are the days of weak, feckless, America-last leadership from the Oval Office. The American people are sick and tired of the radical left forcing its woke policies into every facet of our lives.
Worst year in American history for illegal border crossings.
It is inhumane to have a border open like this.
President Donald J. Trump is working tirelessly to implement the America First policies that you demanded. And I'll be by his side all the way.
Biggs, where's Andy? Boy, oh boy, there's a guy. It's tough.
America's golden age has arrived. It's time to make America great again.
I want to, first of all, welcome everybody. I'm Andy Biggs, Congressman from Arizona's 5th Congressional District, and I'm here joined today with a special guest, longtime friend, but moreover, he's one of the brightest guys that you'll ever meet. Very good. His name is Jon Riches. He's the Vice President for Litigation at the Goldwater Institute Scharf Norton Center for Constitutional Litigation, and he serves as the Institute's General Counsel. And Jon, glad to have you here.
It's great to be here. Appreciate the nice welcome.
Yeah, I mean, I view you as an expert on a lot of topics, one of which is one of our favorites, which is the federal monitors. But Jon also came and was graciously testified at the House Judiciary Committee's subcommittee hearing on the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, and in February did an outstanding job. And if you're interested in these types of things, I would encourage you to go back and take a look at that hearing, because a lot of people, even around here, they don't get the depth of what's happening in Maricopa County. Jon's work has been featured in national outlets such as the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. And so we've got some good stuff today. We have a bill, Jon, that I just debated yesterday in the Rules Committee, and both of my colleagues across the aisle that were kind of leading the debate at one time or another both admitted that they didn't really know all that's going on in Maricopa County, but doggone it, they were going to oppose the bill. Okay.
Good to know the facts first, I suppose.
Yeah, no, why facts are stubborn things. You might have to respond to them. Right. So I had a good time with them, but I mean, they actually conceded that but they said all kinds of things that were erroneous. And in reality, I believe that they knew that what they were saying is erroneous, and that's the problem. They didn't like being called on it. But we're going to talk about the monitor in Maricopa County, and they quite frankly, it was as if they believed that Sheriff Arpaio, who's a friend of mine, and I like the guy, and we get along great, but it's like they still think he's the sheriff,
right,
under which the original complaint was filed. We'll get into all of this, but tell me what you think. So my bill is called the Monitor Accountability Act, and so why do you think we need that? Why is that even necessary? First of all, before we get there, let's do context. Why do we have a monitor in the state of Arizona? Why do monitors happen at all? And is there? I've always kind of thought there might be a weird kind of constitutional separation of powers issue. And I think even the courts have, when they've reviewed it, have kind of indicated, yeah, you can do this, but not too long. You can't do that. What do you think, Jon?
Well, I think you're right, and I very much appreciate your leadership on this issue, because you've brought to light a lot of the abuses going on, not only in Maricopa County, but obviously nationwide. So what happened out here is about a dozen years ago, a lawsuit was brought against then Sheriff Joe Arpaio. This was 4 sheriffs ago in Maricopa County.
Right.
And the basic allegation was that he was engaging in racial profiling during traffic stops and that sort of thing. So the federal district court entered what's called a structural injunction that, as a general rule, is supposed to be a pretty drastic remedy and supposed to be limited and targeted to get the sheriff's office into compliance with effectively the Constitution. The problem is that, and then the court appointed what's called a federal monitor to oversee that injunction. There's a lot of problems with this. The first is that, as I mentioned, this was 4 sheriffs ago, so a lot's changed from what was allegedly happening then to what is happening now. The second problem is you have in place this federal monitor we've been talking about. And what is that really? It's a court-appointed private entity that goes in and is supposed to oversee the operations of the sheriff's department.
Right.
The issue, though, is they then get to direct the operations of the sheriff's department, and they get to receive pretty massive payouts from the taxpayer for, quote unquote, overseeing those operations. And we know to date that this monitor has received $30 million in money from Maricopa County taxpayers to do what's essentially, as you indicated, this is really a local government executive function. It's not really a judicial function. It's certainly not a function for this private entity. And even worse from our perspective is there's really no transparency as to how this massive amount of money is being spent.
Well, there's so much I'd love to unpack there. Let's just unpack the last thing you said. There's no transparency. So the monitors bill somebody, and when he bills the entity that's going to ultimately pay for this, what do those bills look like? I mean, I've worked and I've seen law firm billing, and sometimes it'll just say legal services rendered in May, and it'll have this $12,500. I mean, what's our monitor doing there?
Well, I'll tell you what, if any reputable law firm gave the sort of lack of detail that this monitor is getting, that law firm should be fired. And I would be shocked if any court would ever approve attorney fees based on the very little information that this monitor is providing. So what he does is he will submit an invoice to Maricopa County that taxpayers then pay, but there's nothing really on it. It's just, services rendered, went out for a site visit. It's these really vague, indescript items. And so what we've said all along is, look, this is a lot of money. This guy and his firm are getting $30 million for 10 years, about $2 to $3 million every year from our taxpayers. Taxpayers have a right to see an itemized breakdown of how that money is being spent. And we know, too, there's been some reporting on this. There's been some really bizarre expenditures. For example, this monitor spent about 3 years of office lease payments for an office that him and his team never used. Why is that going on? So, taxpayers obviously have a right to know this information. They have a right under state public records laws. It's really clear. As citizens, we need to know what our government is up to. We have a right to know what our government is up to, and we're not receiving any of that in this case.
Yes, it's really kind of to me, it's kind of a weird deal. You've got this guy who's our monitor, and we're paying him a lot of money. You would think that he'd also be focused solely on Maricopa County, but it turns out this guy isn't, right? So he's managed to hang on to gigs in other places. So tell us about that.
Yeah. He's been a court-appointed monitor in other jurisdictions. I think there's been similar questions raised about the amount of money that's being spent, the lack of transparency around the amount of money being spent, and that, I think that is, we got to put some attention on that. Like, you can't have a situation where this private firm is just going around collecting taxpayer money and isn't providing taxpayers the sort of details that they need to know as to how that money is being spent. So, it's an issue. If this would happen in any other context and there was not a federal court that was involved, all of this information would be available to the public
Right.
under state and federal transparency laws, under the federal FOIA, under the state public records law.
Yeah, I want to go back, man. There's so much to talk about here because it just drives me crazy. But let's go back to the origins of this. So yesterday, my colleagues that were debating me on this, they were bringing up things like tent city and those types of things. They have nothing to do with this case. This case is solely a traffic stop case where this guy named Melendres believed, and they put a class together, but they believed that they were racially profiled because they were Hispanic.
Mm-hmm.
And the ACLU representative brought the lawsuit, Melendres versus let's see, Sheriff Joe at the time, right? And now, this monitor, together with the court, they issued like 172, I think it is, paragraphs of things that they wanted different, that didn't necessarily even pertain to an issue of racial profiling in traffic stops.
Yeah.
And so, John, tell me, how can that be consistent with case law, which is basically said you can't do that? You have to be very narrowly focused.
Right. No, yeah, exactly. Right. So it's totally permissible. In fact, we want in our system of separation of powers for federal courts to step in if there is, in fact, a constitutional violation. But if a federal court is going to impose an injunction like this, it's got to be directed. It's got to be specific. It's got to be really narrow. Having 122 separate paragraphs for things that don't have anything to do with the alleged constitutional violation is problematic, right? For a few reasons. One, we don't want federal courts to be doing this sort of stuff at all. Like we don't want federal courts to be deciding every little way in which a local sheriff's department is operating. Local law enforcement is quintessentially a state power. That's not a federal power. That's a state power, and it's delegated to counties and to cities by the state. And so having a federal court say, well, I think that this should be different and that should be different, and having a federal monitor who has a financial interest come in and opine about the things that he thinks ought to be done in 122 separate ways creates this separation of powers issue and this federalism issue. So you have these two separate constitutional concerns going on at the same time. And of course, what we've seen is that as the county has come into compliance, and they've been in substantial compliance with this very long, cumbersome order for a very long time, as they've gotten close to satisfying all of these over 100 requirements, the goalpost seems to move so that they can't get into full compliance. And, who gets to opine as to whether they're fully in compliance? Of course, the monitor, who has the financial interest in making sure that this order continues to be in place so that they can continue to do their $3 million a year oversight functions.
Wow, and it's so disheartening because look, this monitor has actually even told them what they can wear on their uniforms, how they do their striping for their officers and patrol, their deputies. I mean, it's so far beyond what the scope should be. In fact, and I want to get to this in a second. Case law is pretty clear on this, that the concern that the courts have had, the Supreme Court and other courts have had, is that because there's a financial interest, you have a potential to incentivize a monitor to do what you just said, change the goalposts, to stay on, to find that they're not fulfilling whatever boundaries or whatever changes that he feels are necessary to set the boundaries back where they need to be. The monitor is incentivized to keep lingering on, and you implied that, but that is one of the things that the courts have said. Another one that they've said is they don't want the monitor to usurp elected officials' authority and their constitutional rights as well as duties. And so when the monitor is getting in and saying, oh, look, you can't wear your uniform, you can't, putting those stripes down on the sleeves instead of up on the sleeve, that's a no-go. Those types of things like that. You go, well, what is too much too much. And when are we going to take care of that? And that's the real problem that we see. So expand on that just a little bit.
Yeah, what article of the U.S. Constitution governs the uniforms of local law enforcement officials? Yeah, so and that creates those two really troubling aspects of federalism. So you have the separation of powers aspect, where courts and the monitor are making decisions that the executive branch should be using. But then you also have this federalism issue where state and local law enforcement is quintessentially a state function.
Right.
And the minutia that this monitor is getting into in terms of how Maricopa County Sheriff's Office ought to operate, those sorts of decisions should be made at the local level by the elected sheriff, because he's accountable to the people who elected him. And then you go a step further and say, well, now we're talking about a pretty significant expenditure every year. So not only is this federal monitor making decisions about law enforcement, in effect, the federal monitor and the court order has usurped spending and taxing power from local governments. And that is another federalism issue, because state and local taxpayers have to be the ones to decide, and their elected representatives, what they're going to spend their money on. And if they feel like an expenditure isn't a proper outlay of public funds, they can hold the elected official accountable. But here you have a court directing spending power and, by extension, taxing power. So it's almost like a double whammy there that should be concerned. And because the monitor, as you said, has a financial interest in it, when does it end? When is enough enough? Is a dozen years enough? Is 4 sheriffs later enough? Apparently not at the moment.
Yeah. Just to get back to the posture of the case, because I think this is interesting too. So you have it was started by ACLU and Melindres, and then the Department of Justice intervened on behalf of the plaintiff, or working with the plaintiff ostensibly, and now the Department of Justice has come in. They filed a document. It basically in response to, so I guess the county filed the document saying enough's enough. There was a response filed by the plaintiffs here, Melindres, and then the Department of Justice weighed in and said, no, wait a second. They've been in substantial compliance of everything. Now the only thing that they have not completed, essentially, is there's a backlog of cases, and those cases were generated because of the lengthy micromanagement of the monitor. And even that, they've reduced it from over like 2,600 cases, something like that. Don't quote me on the number, but taking it down to somewhere around 500 cases. And this is how micromanaged they are. The monitor insisted that they hire more staff people, or reassign staff people to go over and evaluate that backlog of cases dealing with traffic stops. And what they have found is all those traffic stops were actually being done perfectly, or close to perfectly. They did not violate any of the monitor's business. So that supposedly, I guess, is the last hang-up. And it seems to me that's kind of tangential to, have you systematically changed your practices, which is exactly what the monitor himself has found.
Right. Exactly. So the county did the right thing here, right? They have a tool where they can go back to federal court and say, hey, look, we need to get relief from this overarching cumbersome order that has been substantially complied with for over a decade. So they filed a motion making that case, and the Justice Department joined them effectively. So now you only really have the monitor, the party with the financial incentive, saying, no, you don't get relief from the judgment for all of these reasons that really have nothing to do with the original the alleged violation. So, I think what we need is for the court to make a decision on that motion for relief, and then the county can decide what to do with it from there. Because there needs to be some, and that's another thing. And I think your bill addressed part of this. That's another thing too. Is not only does there need to be oversight and accountability for the monitor, but federal district courts need to have some sort of accountability over these orders that are going to last forever, and some sort of meaningful review of them.
Yeah, I agree with that. So my bill, for folks who don't know, my bill says, by the way, it's consistent with what Merrick Garland put out on how you have oversight over the monitors, and he said that you shouldn't have a monitor it would be really rare to have a monitor necessary to be the same monitor more than 2 or 3 years. In other words, you should be changing a monitor every 2 to 3 years, which another one of my the Democrats across the aisle said yesterday, Merrick Garland never even addressed the terms of monitors. Well, actually, he did. He said no longer than 2 or 3 years, then you need a new one. And in this case, sometimes you need to change the judge because the judge is, I don't know, locked in, and 6 years ought to be enough. That's twice the length of what a monitor should be. And then you should move on to get somebody else, get new eyes, fresh eyes on this thing. Anyway, there's an idea that comes to my mind, and that is basically a drift in the monitor's duties and what the issue is, and that's what I think we've seen here. So originally it's about racial profiling in automobile traffic stops, and now we've drifted over to you got some cases that you don't have enough officers working in this department over here, and oh, by the way, you don't, what's next? You don't have enough officers. Well, yeah, we can't retain because we can't. People want to leave because they want to go to a more rational place to be a law enforcement officer. Number one, number two, we can't recruit because you're in here screwing us up, and that's one of the big, huge problems that all 4 of these sheriffs have had to go through because of this monitor.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. And it's exactly those sorts of things that should be resolved at the state level and at the local level. How are we going to be able to operate our department? What sort of opportunities are we going to give to new hires? How are we going to place people? What sort of duties are they going to be doing? All of that stuff affects recruitment and retention. And I mean, that's why those sorts of decisions have to be made by the people that are accountable for them, which is the elected sheriff. Because otherwise it starts to create exactly these problems that you've been describing.
So, John, how do you stop this kind of monitor drift, or this, basically a perpetual gig for this guy? I mean, by the way, this guy, just so people get a feel for this, our monitor in Maricopa County, I think he's still ongoing in Oakland, actually, after 20 years.
Yep.
So he's got a gig in Oakland. At various points of this, he's had gigs in New York and several other locations as well. And as John pointed out earlier, he's had the similar complaints everywhere, where people thought it'd be. I remember one I was reading about. They thought it'd be $50,000 total nut, and it turned out to be $250,000. So it's just a grift in so many respects.
I think your solution goes a long way to solving it. You got to cut off the time period. You can't have the same monitor in place for an extended period of time. It should be finite, and it should be really defined. Look, you got 2 years or 3 years, whatever that number is, and then that's it. We're moving on. And I think also there needs to be some transparency around this. If we are going to have a monitor in place, taxpayers must know what the monitor is doing and how the monitor is spending our money. And I think those 2 pieces are both pretty important.
Yeah. If this bill passes, becomes law, then I think it helps a lot. But the substance of what I've been talking about really gets back to a constitutional issue. And I don't know how you ultimately solve that if the courts are not going to help us And if everybody doesn't recognize that a court monitor is really a violation of the separation of powers, and if you have, I mean, I'll just leave it there and just to say, what do you think is the solution long term to restoring constitutional norms?
We likely need to get some appellate jurisprudence around this. We need to get some of these final orders taken up on appeal so that the federal courts of appeal and the United States Supreme Court can opine as to what should properly be the limitations of these sorts of monitoring activities. I think federal legislation, I think, your bill, I think, goes a very long way in solving these problems, but there could be other sorts of avenues of review that Congress mandates for the judiciary. So maybe some expedited appellate processes, things like that. But at the end of the day, it needs to come down to accountability, both for the monitor and for oversight over whatever the injunction is. And there's got to be tight timelines in place. There has to be a lack of financial incentives on the part of the monitor so that these things just don't go on perpetually.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're trying to do is say the monitor cannot make more than the U.S. Attorney General. I mean,
that's good.
How about that?
Yeah, right.
So I mean, it's just, but it is amazing to me. We haven't even gotten into all the silly stuff, but even Merrick Garland, and I disagreed with Merrick Garland on so much, John, but when he put out his letter based on a research project that he gave to one of his subordinates, I just thought, even if you could get his stuff in, you might take a pretty good step towards curbing these abuses that we're seeing. But golly, I mean, I'm going to be debating this tomorrow on the floor again, and it's just amazing the misinformation that's out there. I mean, because it isn't just in Maricopa County, right? This goes on everywhere, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. It's a nationwide issue, and it's a proper issue for Congress to address. And it's disheartening to hear that you were kind of receiving those sorts of uninformed as they were, but uninformed opposition from some folks on the committee. This is not a partisan issue. This is a constitutional good government separation of powers issue. It's a transparency issue. Our lawmakers of all stripes should sort of be on the same page on these fundamental principles of how our government ought to operate. So, that's sort of troubling that you have these uninformed people making decisions based on their lack of information that don't want to advance, objectives that, frankly, we should all want to advance regardless of any political party.
The last point I'll make, and then I'll give you the last word, John, is it seems to me that when you have this kind of perpetual oversight, where they're actually taking over your office. I mean, they basically have taken over the office.
Yep.
And they're not elected, and they also don't know what's going on. It seems to me you disincentivize people to comply or even to run for these offices, because why run when you are basically hamstrung? You can't fulfill your duty or your promises, what the electorate demands and desires of you. It seems to me that you disincentivize good people from running.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what you've seen. So you've had Republican, you've had Democrat sheriffs, and in fact, the Democrat sheriff, from what I understand or from what reports have said, left in large part because this order was so onerous he couldn't do his job to properly run the sheriff's office. So you disincentivize people who want to run for these offices and do the right thing. You disincentivize people that want to get into law enforcement and work for the county because they don't want to be micromanaged in this way. And it creates these weird situations where all of these decisions should be happening locally And instead, they're just being made in a vacuum by a party with a financial incentive to have this stuff go on forever, while you and me and while citizens in Maricopa County really have no idea what's going on. That's not the way. It's not the way our government is structured, and it's not the way it should work.
Sounds like somebody might be getting disenfranchised just a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, both law enforcement decisions and taxing and spending decisions.
Yeah. Well, Jon, I hope everybody understands how much respect I have for Jon Riches. He's a great lawyer, and he's a great advocate for liberty and freedom, and we appreciate what the Goldwater Institute does. And Jon, thanks for taking some time with me today, and God bless you, and best to your family.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman. Appreciate you. Appreciate your leadership on this really important issue. I think most people would have no idea what's going on if it wasn't for your leadership. So thanks for all you do, and it's wonderful to chat with you as always.
Thanks, Jon. Take care.
Take care.